Okay, so we figured out how much yellow paint for the first one. We figured out how much blue paint for the second one. So we want this to all be in the same proportion, or the same ratio, I should say, okay? Again, this is a really easy example to visualize, because if you have a little can of paint and you like the color green, and then they go to mix it and they don't put the same mixture in, you're going to end up with a different shade. So if I'm thinking about this, blue to yellow, let's write this as a fraction, because that is one way we can think about ratios, written in that form, 2 to 3. Well, in this example, I had 40 to 60. Okay, I want this ratio, or this comparison, to be the same as this one in terms of how they are combined. So what I want is these two to be equal. Okay, we see that this is times 20 and that this is times 20. So they are equal, they're equivalent fractions. Now, we didn't really have time to get into this in the Zoom class. We would have talked about it a lot more if we'd had more time and we're in our classroom, but you may also remember cross multiplying. Okay, once I have two ratios equal to each other, that's what we call a proportion. They're in proportion. And if I cross multiply, this cross product, 2 times 60, should equal this cross product, 40 times 3, which they do. In that case, they both equal 120. So let's go down to here. If I have 2 to 3, and here I have 32 to 48, and I want to check it, 2 ways to check it. Whatever got multiplied by the top, that's what the bottom has to also. Or you could also do the cross products. Okay, and we can see that it's really easy visually here to see, yes, it is 2 groups of 16 and 3 groups of 16. Okay, last part of this, same paint, is I have my blue and my yellow in the ratio of 2 to 3. And what I know now is a little different. I know that I want to make altogether 150 pails of paint. And I want to know how much blue paint I will need, how many pails of blue paint, and how many pails of yellow paint. So there are a few different ways we could think about this, okay? And hopefully you're kind of thinking these things already in your head. One thing I can think about is that this paint altogether is made up of 5 equal portions. Some of those portions are blue, some of those portions are yellow, but they're the same size. So if I can split 150 into 5 equal portions, then I know what each of these little blocks would be. 150 divided by 5 is going to be 30. So I could say, okay, each of these is going to be 30. That would mean I would need 60 pails of blue, and I would need 90 pails of yellow. Always check, yes, they add up to 150. And they are still in this proportion. So 2 over 3 equals 60 over 90. Well, each one was multiplied by 30. Another way that you could think about this from the beginning is you could think about, okay, when I look at this part right here, how many pails altogether do I need here? If I have 2 pails of blue and I have 3 pails of yellow, altogether I need 5 pails. So 5 times what gave me 150 times 30? So this got multiplied by 30 and that got multiplied by 30. So you can kind of compare the part to the whole or the whole to the whole. Okay. And there's a lot more we could have done with this. We've kind of done a little more with it in class, but at least we're getting a basic idea of it here. And you're seeing the tools that really nicely visually show this to your students. Okay, we're going to do one more problem here that kind of takes it a little bit of a step further. Okay, so we have 2 girls who have cards. Maybe they're baseball cards or something, it doesn't exactly say. But we'll have some kind of cards. And it says that the ratio of Shantae's cards to Jessica's cards is 5 to 3. Okay, so Shantae to Jessica is 5 to 3. So Shantae has more cards than Jessica does, right? It's clear to see here. Okay, so let's draw a strip diagram for this first before we get to the rest of the problem. So we know that Shantae and Jessica have some cards. Try to make this kind of even. Okay, so Shantae to Jessica is 5 to 3, right? Whatever each of these represents, that's the same thing that each of these represents. So after Shantae gives Jessica 15 of her cards, both girls have the same number of cards. Okay, so let me read that again. So after Shantae gives Jessica 15 of her cards, and then the number is equal. Okay, I'm just abbreviating here. So after Shantae gives Jessica 15 cards, they have the same number of cards. So that's really tricky to figure out, right? This is where the strip diagram, I think, really, really helps. So visually, let's look at this. We can see that when we start out, they clearly don't have the same number of cards. However much each of these blocks is worth, Shantae has 5 of those blocks, Jessica has 3 of those blocks. Okay. Well, think about, something visual, something concrete. And when we were doing this on the Zoom class the other day, we were looking at these little orange blocks that we used to use in class, right? They come apart. We use them for units a lot, for the cubes, but it can be used for all different things. We also use them for mean, median, and mode. So right now, Shantae has 5, Jessica has 3. Okay, let's think about physically, what could we do to make these two the same? Well, we could take off one block off the end of Shantae's and attach it to Jessica's, and now they're the same. Okay, they're representing the same number. So let's think about that up here. We could take this block off of Shantae and put it down here, and now they have the same amount, right? This one's gone. Marker kind of died there. That one's gone. Gives this chunk of cards to Jessica, and now they have the same. Well, how do I know how many cards this is? It says up here. Shantae gave Jessica 15 cards. So this little pile of cards that she handed over was 15. Well, we know that in this ratio, all of these portions have to be the same. So if this little part, 1/5 of hers, was 15, then all of these parts of hers had to be 15. And all of Jessica's had to be 15. Okay. How many do they have now? Now, they each have 60 cards. Let's check it by thinking about what they had before. Before, Shantae had 60 plus the extra 15, so she had 75. Jessica had 60 minus that 15 that she hadn't been given yet, so she had 45. So what I want to do to check this is to check, is 5 to 3 equal to 75 over 45? Or 75 to 45, right? Is this proportion equal? Well, a couple ways we could do it. We could cross multiply, see if the cross products are equal. We could also say, okay, what was this multiplied by? And was this multiplied by the same thing? And you could use your calculator to divide or whatever, but you'd find that 5 times 15 is 75 and 3 times 15 is 45. So they were both multiplied by the same thing, which we can see visually here, right? 3 groups of 15, 5 groups of 15. Okay, let's do one more like this. So we still have Shantae and Jessica. Now their ratio is a little bit different. So their ratio is 5 to 2. So Shantae still has more cards. She still has cards that can be split into 5 equal parts. And Jessica has cards that can be split into 2 of those equal parts. So again, after Shantae gives Jessica $12 cards, then they have the same number. All right, so now with our little blocks here, here's Shantae that has 5, whatever that quantity is, and Jessica has 2. Okay, so if we're thinking about kind of doing the same thing, right now they're clearly very different, right? So if we kind of think about doing the same thing, if I take 1 off here and I add it to Jessica's, I mean, that gets them a little closer, but they're still not quite the same. But if I then take off 1 more off Shantae's and put it on Jessica's, now Jessica's is more. So I can't really do that. So let's see what we're doing up here. So if we said I could take this one off and bring it down, and there's my group that I brought down. And then I have 1 left. Well, what can I do with that to make it even? I can cut it in half. So I could take half of this down here, and here's my half, and now they each have 1, 2, 3 and a half parts. 1, 2, 3 and a half. Okay, so we have kind of figured out what's happening, right? Now, Shantae gave Jessica 12 cards. So that 12 cards was represented by 1 1/2 parts. So 1 part can't be 12, because then 1 1/2 wouldn't be 12. So we can kind of think about how to split it up. One way you could think about it is if you split this into halves, then there's 3 equal parts. Each of them would get 4. Okay, so the 1 part represents 8. The other part, half of that, is 4. That means each of these boxes is 8, so half a box is 4. Each of these boxes is 8, half a box is 4. So now they each have 8, 16, 24, and 4 is 28. Let's check and see what they had before and make sure it's in this ratio. So before, Shantae had 28 plus that 12, so she had 40. Jessica had 28 minus the 12 that she didn't have before. She had 16. Or you can also see Shantae had 5 groups of 8. Jessica had only 2 groups of 8. Is this in the ratio of 5 to 2? Well, 5 to 2, 40 to 16, yeah. We can see that both of them were multiplied by 8. Okay, let me just give you an example of, sometimes it's easier to see the check when we do something that's wrong. So let's say I had said here instead, something else, I don't know, but I ended up with 20 over 4 or 40 over 20, and I wanted to know if these two are the same. Well, this gets multiplied by 8, but this is not multiplied by 8. They weren't changed the same way. And you can see that this would reduce down to 2, this would reduce down to 2 1/2, right? Or so if they aren't equal, then they're not in proportion. Those ratios are not the same. We want the ratios to be the same, right? Otherwise, things like our paint or our punch wouldn't have the same makeup. Okay, so that's what we talked about with ratios. There is not going to be homework this week on this specifically, but it will be on the final. So I'll include it, of course, in the study guide. And if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks, guys.